Hello, everyone. My name's Jan Sharrock, and I'm the Executive Director of Fellowship Affairs at the Australian and New Zealand College of Anaesthetists. It is truly my great pleasure, on behalf of ANZCA and the Faculty of Pain Medicine, to welcome you all from around the world to the launch of The Chloroformist, Associate Professor Chris Ball's latest book. I would now like to acknowledge the Bunurong people as the traditional custodians of the country on which we work and meet. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, extend our respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from the many nations of this land known as Australia. We also acknowledge and respect Maori as the tangata whenua of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and we are committed to upholding the principles of Te Tiriti o Wātangi. I first met Chris just over 7 years ago, and since then we've been on some interesting journeys, not all of them mentionable. The latest of these journeys, and very fresh in both our minds, was the college's first ever virtual annual scientific meeting, run over 8 days and for over 2,500 delegates. Like everything she does, Chris steered the mighty ship that is the ASM and all its passengers through calm and troubled waters. She did it with style and dignity, with humour and compassion. I have thought long and hard how best to describe Chris, and when listening to her conversation with Richard Feidler this week, she described Joseph Clover and the type of person he was. I needed no further thought because Chris could have been describing herself. A quiet enabler, a collaborator, someone who does not seek out the limelight but allows others to complete their work, and who really facilitates a lot of really good work by other people. Endearing qualities. Chris, you have these and many other qualities in spades. My dear friend Chris, take a bow and take the time to take pleasure that around the world today, we all raise a glass to your success and to Joseph Clover, the Chloroformist. I'd now like to hand the baton to Professor Paul Miles, Chris's great friend and colleague. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you all those that are listening. I'm Paul Miles. I'm the Professor Director at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne and at Monash University. And of course, Chris works with me in our daily work as anaesthesiologists. I, in fact, have known Chris Ball since 1976. It's been a great journey of itself. It's got its own history, but I won't spend any time focusing on that. I do want to really celebrate Chris's immense achievements, particularly around the area of history and, of course, her work as an honorary curator of the Geoffrey Kaye Museum in Anaesthetic History at the college, and it's been so for over 30 years. Through that time, she's got immense accolades, both nationally and internationally, including, obviously, the Wood Library Laureate position for the American Society of Anesthesiologists, the Ben Barry Medal here in Australia through the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, and more recently, an Order of Australia. Each of these have been fantastic recognitions of her work. And I do know that The Chloroformist, this book, began really with her discovery of a small medical case book that had been in the Geoffrey Kaye collection. And it was really through her interest and intrigue in history itself and putting together the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, really, that make up most historians' work. And I know it was an immense journey, both in terms of physical travelling to different parts of the world, a lot of internet searching, a lot of email, a lot of telephone calls, a lot of meeting, including with members of the Joseph Clover family. So I think what's happened, and I've read this book, it's truly magnificent. It's such a great read. It is so fascinating, and it really does paint a picture. It really creates a story, exactly how anaesthesia was through the mid-18th century, how really very much of the work of John Snow and Joseph Clover and others underpinned this work very much with a focus on safety, an understanding initially of physics and chemistry, but now, of course, pharmacology and equipment. And in this story, it's not just the life of Joseph Clover himself or the person he was, although this is very much in the story, but also those around him and the circumstances of the time, living in London, and the developments of surgery, of course, through that time. His work himself was very much collaborative, based on teamwork and mutual respect, something, again, that Chris excels in herself as an anesthesiologist. And his drive for excellence, really trying to improve on what was being used, how it could be done better, very much demonstrating all his discoveries and inventions and promoting all the time inquiry, research, and this quest to improve. And if you look on the cover of this wonderful book, you see that picture of Joseph Clover with his hand on a pulse, really quintessentially demonstrating the type of person he was, the type of person he felt a safe and expert anaesthetist should be. And Chris, I hope you don't mind, I just want to quote just a little bit in the book right at the end of chapter 30, which really affected me, I think. It was actually one of the obituaries that had been written about him. I don't know who it was from, you may know that. But I'll just read this little bit. It says, "Those who've had the pleasure of operating with him well remember what pains he took to allay fear. Whether it were the little child or the adult, he would find some aspect that would be sure to interest the patient. And as consciousness was ebbing away, the remarks would cease, to be resumed upon approach of recovery." And I think you wrote directly after that, allaying fear in both patients and surgeons may have been his greatest skill. I just thought that was a really wonderful little description and highlighting again some of the importance of all that you've discovered. And the book ends with, I think, an incredible thought-provoking and beautiful chapter titled The Tour. And I really love this. It brings us into the present day at the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne, where Chris imagines what Joseph Clover and many of the historical figures that she described through the book would value in our modern setting. Much would be familiar and so much would be celebrated. I just think that was really fantastic. And in fact, I want to celebrate you, Chris, for this magnificent achievement. It really is a wonderful book. Congratulations.
Thank you, Paul. I'm not sure, am I online now, Monica? All right. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Monica and Laura, for making this all happen. I know it's been an incredibly difficult few days and weeks trying to work out where we were going to hold this book launch, and it has been rearranged several times. Now I'm going to try and share my screen because I have some pictures here. So I was hoping to welcome you all here from the College of Anaesthetists tonight and to show some of you around the Geoffrey Kaye Museum, but obviously the COVID gods had other thoughts and that is not where we are, but we're there in spirit. And of course, we're very fortunate that the events of the last 18 months means that we have all got very used to Zoom. And as a result of us being familiar with Zoom, I've been able to invite so many people here tonight who live on all sides of the world. My family in the UK and in Belgium and Switzerland and parts of Scandinavia, as well as friends in America. So welcome to all of you, whatever time of day it is. I hope that you're all getting great reception. Just down the road from the college and also from the Alfred Hospital where I work is a very large gum tree. This tree has stood for 300 or 500 years. It was there long before the settlement of Melbourne, long before the ships arrived from the other side of the world. And it's a reminder to all of us, I think, that history is important. All history, like the written history in this book, oral histories, history buried in the earth, history etched in the rocks. I acknowledge that the college sits on the traditional estate of the Yowankut Willem clan of the Boonwurrung language group. I acknowledge their deep spiritual and cultural connections between the people, the land, the waters, and the sky. I pay my respect to the elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all First Nations people, particularly any who may be here tonight. We're very fortunate that the College of Anaesthetists has preserved its history in such a wonderful way with the Geoffrey Kaye Museum. And I'd like to particularly acknowledge the role that Rod Westhorpe has played in that preservation. It was Rod that encouraged the college to employ professional curators. It was Rod that encouraged the college to preserve the museum. And as a result of that, I got involved in the history of anaesthesia, and that is what has led us to this point tonight. So I hope that Rod has managed to join the Zoom chat, and I'd really like to thank him for all that he's done for us at the college and for me personally. I'd also like to thank all of our previous curators, all of the college counsellors and presidents who have supported the museum over the years. Because of them, we have a world-class museum and something we should be really proud of. Unfortunately, our museum is shut at the moment because of COVID, but I would really invite all of you who have an opportunity to visit our online displays. They are wonderful. They go back over many years and they're freely available on the Geoffrey Kaye Museum website, which you can access through the college or by just Googling Geoffrey Kaye Museum. Our next exhibition, which is in its final stages of development, promises to be a wonderful thing. Monica has been working closely with many First Nations curators and designers, and this display will be unlike any we have ever done before. It is a wonderful collaboration and a celebration of traditional medicine. And as part of that display, the wonderful Amos Roche has made a recording of a healing dirge. He travelled especially to West Gippsland to a cave where he recorded this very lengthy healing music. And it is incredibly beautiful, and I'm really excited that we will soon be able to bring this to our display. As a result of this recording, he has also made it available to some Aboriginal rehabilitation centres as part of their treatment program. And that to me just shows that museums have a far greater reach than they used to, and they can really link the past and the present in constructive as well as educational roles. That's what I've tried to do with this book. I've tried really hard to use this book to inform the public about not just our history, but what we do, what our role is in patient care, what our role is in the whole of the patient's journey, and how we interact with surgeons and other members of the surgical team. And when I look at the original guest list I had for tonight, I realised that that reflected some of this theme. There are family and friends here tonight. There are historians. But among the doctors, there are surgeons, radiologists, intensivists, physicians, general practitioners, and emergency physicians. That is the world we work in. We do not work alone, but as in collaboration with so many other specialties. Joseph Clover was, I believe, a great collaborator. So this book is a story of anaesthesia and surgery developing together. It's a story of friendships. It's a story of conflict. It's a story of how the world of medicine interacted with the world around it. It's seen through the eyes of this man because he was a great observer, and he left a great number of personal papers. And as Paul said, I have been on a wonderful journey finding all these papers around the world. It started with this casebook, which had been pressed into a picture frame many, many years ago. We don't know who did it, but it was probably in about the 1960s. And it had remained open on this page, which relates to an incident under chloroform, for decades, until Elizabeth Triarico, who was our first professional curator, had the sense to open up this picture frame and find a whole book inside. And the book had an inscription on the cover which said that it had been given by Mary Clover to Robert McIntosh, who was first professor of anaesthesia in Britain. And he had given it to Geoffrey Kaye a very long time ago in the 1940s. So we were very curious about why we had this book, and we also wanted it to be conserved. The cover was falling apart. And when we sent it off for conservation, we discovered an index that had been covered up. So obviously at some point somebody else had rebound the book. So the book has now been totally conserved and digitised and is available for study. And I went on a journey of discovery trying to find out why we had the book and where all of his other papers had gone. And the journey took me all around the world. I went here to Aylsham, which is where Joseph Clover was born and lived, and discovered that the shop his parents used to own is now a chemist, and the houses over the top are known as Joseph Clover Court and are public housing. I wandered around Norwich with an 1840s map in my hand, looking to see where he had walked, and found myself at the doors of the old Norwich Hospital, which is now also a block of flats, but the external part of the building has been preserved. And I have spent many, many hours here in the rare reading room at the Wellcome collection. It is the most wonderful place to work. You put in little slips and people come out with all these books for you to read that have been not handled for hundreds of years. And you're surrounded by people doing all sorts of wonderful work with Egyptian papyrus and all sorts of historic material. It's become like a second home to me, and I'm really sad that I can't be there or visit there at the moment. But in the Wellcome collection, I found wonderful pages like this wonderful table that Clover made that originally made no sense to me. But eventually I acquired some papers from British Columbia in Vancouver, and they were the secrets that unlocked the code of the material that was in the Wellcome collection. And then I went to Chicago and did a fellowship at the Wood Library Museum, where they had several of his diaries that had been bought at auction and would otherwise have been lost. And I travelled all the way to Crete to meet with Anthony Clover, who I really hope has managed to join this meeting. Anthony is a descendant of Joseph Clover, and it's been wonderful to meet him and hear all of his family stories. And I'm really grateful to the Clover family for their cooperation with this book. And so the book now is here in this wonderful cover, thanks to the work of everyone at Melbourne University Press. They have been such a delight to work with. From the first Zoom call I had with Nathan Hollier, everything has gone seamlessly. Those of you who are used to publishing in journals will know how much we dread our first reviews, how much we believe that reviewer number 2 is trying to ruin our lives. I expected there to be an awful lot of rewriting to do, but none of that happened. There were just wonderful people who helped me on this journey. The copy editor, Paul Smits, up in Canberra, has fixed up all the little errors in my grammar. Kathy Smith, my editor, has patiently explained to me everything that was happening. A wonderful proofreader not only proofread the whole book, but did quite a bit of fact checking as well. And just in the last few weeks, Sarah Vale has done the most amazing job arranging the publicity. So I'm immense for all of them and to everyone else who has been involved in the production of this book. There are many other people to thank. I hope that I have put them all in the acknowledgements of the book. And it only remains to thank Jonathan, our children, Jackie and Charlie, and their partners, Elle and Dennis, for all the support that they give me all the time in all my work. Now, I believe it's customary at a book launch to read an extract from the book. So I am going to read an extract which I think encompasses everything that I believe Joseph Clover represents. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and hopefully Monica's going to be able to share hers while I read from the book. Okay, so this passage starts in the middle of about chapter 5, and it relates to the story of chloroform anaesthesia. Within weeks, the first death from chloroform anaesthesia had been reported. Hannah Greener, a young girl having an ingrown toenail removed, died within 3 minutes of the commencement of the chloroform anaesthetic. Similar deaths followed, some of the patients seemingly fit and healthy prior to the procedure. There were many theories and a great deal of confusion about these deaths, sparking a debate that was continued until the 1920s. Some, like the careful John Snow, thought it due to overdose. Others suspected pre-existing heart disease or simply fear of the procedure. Curiously, though, the use of chloroform only intensified. This drug was so much better than ether. It was as if anaesthesia had been discovered all over again, and a few unexplained deaths were not sufficient to stop chloroform's rapid acceptance. Another perceived advantage of chloroform was that anyone could administer it. Doctors, medical students, nurses, porters, any convenient person could be persuaded to administer chloroform for surgical and other painful procedures in teaching hospitals. There were only a few places where chloroform administration was allocated to a particular person. One of these was University College Hospital. When Joseph Clover took up his position at the hospital in late 1848, chloroform was already well established. Like so many new therapeutic agents, it was being tried for everything, initially thought of as a universal panacea. At low doses, it was an analgesic, relieving the pain of everything from childbirth to toothache. In higher doses, it was an efficient and relatively pleasant anaesthetic for surgical operations. As the cholera epidemic took hold in London in 1848, many practitioners, including those at University College Hospital, administered chloroform to desperate, dying patients. Need to change a slide, Monica. Attempting to relieve their agonising stomach cramps. No doubt Clover, responsible for medication at the hospital, rapidly became familiar with the drug and its many different uses. How Clover initially came to be in charge of chloroform administration in the operating theatre is not recorded, but it was probably a natural extension of his job description. It also allowed him to be in the operating theatre for all the major surgeries, something which would have helped with the preparation for his fellowship exams. Surgery was his ultimate career goal, but as the apothecary, his opportunities for actually operating within the hospital were limited. The surgeons and their house surgeons had priority in that regard. In 1851, the title of apothecary was changed to resident medical officer, but the job remained the same. Over the 5 years that Clover held this position at University College Hospital, he administered chloroform 1900 times, including 9/10 of the cases which were taken into the operating theatre. In total, according to his calculations, chloroform was administered 2,900 times over that period, meaning he gave about 2/3 of the anaesthetics in the hospital. Unfortunately, we do not have the figures for the operating theatre cases at that time, but even if all of Clover's 1,900 administrations were in theatre, which is clearly not the case, his calculations suggest that most of the anaesthetics given by others were outside the theatre, either for perceived medical indications, minor procedures, or pain relief. Personally, Clover had no fatalities to contend with, but he recalled 3 deaths in the hospital that were attributable to chloroform administration. One of these deaths was to have a profound influence on anaesthesia at the hospital and likely on Clover's subsequent career. On the 18th of March, 1873, Caroline Baker, a 28-year-old unmarried woman, was admitted to University College Hospital with sloughing genital ulcers. John Erickson prescribed the application of nitric acid, directing his acting house surgeon, Mr. White, to arrange this the following day under chloroform anaesthesia. Accordingly, early on Saturday morning, White administered chloroform to the patient while the physician's assistant, Mr. J.H. Gould, prepared the nitric acid. White gave the chloroform on a piece of lint 5 inches square and folded over several times. Initially, the patient thrashed about, talking loudly, and then suddenly she was still, insensible and pulseless. This was a terrifying situation for the young men, both of whom were technically still students and unprepared to deal with this potential fatality alone. White sent for Clover, and together they attempted to resuscitate Baker, performing artificial respiration, applying galvanism, doing everything they could to no avail. The following Tuesday, the 3 men found themselves at an inquest conducted under the eagle eye of Thomas Wackley, the room crowded with doctors and others, anxious to hear particulars of the catastrophe. This was far from Clover's first inquest. He was often called to give evidence for this and for various other reasons. But for the two young medical students, this must have been quite an ordeal. Fortunately, they were well supported by the senior clinicians at the hospital. Erickson had performed the autopsy with the help of Dr. Richard Quain. Microscopic examination of the heart had revealed fatty degeneration, a popular explanation for fatal outcomes from chloroform anaesthesia. It was an understandable conclusion. The medical community were aware that these deaths were due to sudden cessation of the heart, and with no other explanation, they concluded that these were caused by a microscopic condition they could not predict in life. They were considered, as stated by Erickson in this particular case, purely an accident for which no one was to blame. However, in his summing up, Wackley commented on the dangers of chloroform, saying that great caution should be exercised in its administration. This and the predicament of the 2 young medical students had an impact on the jury. While they were happy to report this as an accidental death, the foreman was anxious to point out it was the unanimous opinion of the jury that a medical gentleman of experience should always be present when chloroform was administered. The following week, the medical committee at University College Hospital held a meeting which Clover attended. They concluded by laying down rules for the administration of chloroform at the hospital, stating that the duty of administering chloroform shall be performed by the resident medical officer in all cases where it is conveniently practicable for him to do so. They also asked Clover to provide instruction to a number of junior doctors so they could provide safe anaesthesia when he was unavailable. One of the people he taught and certified as qualified a month later was Joseph Lister, then house surgeon to Erickson. Clover's time as resident medical officer at University College Hospital gave him skills and connections that would define his subsequent career. At the hospital, he worked with many of the leading surgeons and physicians of the day. John Erickson and Richard Quain became particularly close associates, both including Clover's contributions in subsequent publications. As resident medical officer, Clover taught and mentored medical students and junior doctors, some of whom became lifelong friends. Okay, so I think now we're opening up the book launch to questions. There seem to be quite a lot of messages in the chat, but I'm going to leave that to somebody else to facilitate.
Chris, I might jump in if you don't mind, and thank you so much for that, kind of, I guess, synopsis of some of the part of the story. It certainly sets the tone really nicely. I just really want, if you can just give everyone who's listening a little bit of a description of, or a summary of chapter 10, which I think has got one of the most fantastic titles, as I recall it, And Now for the Cobra.
Okay. I was just quickly looking at the book to see.
I was halfway through the book, and then suddenly this chapter appeared, and it just had so much of Chris Ball written all over it that simply you must have lived within the lives of some of the characters you were describing. If you can just go over that for us, at least as an anecdote.
Okay, so that's probably my favourite story and my favourite character in the whole book. It was very early on in my research into Joseph Clover's life that I found this 2 pages which described a cobra bite. And I was really confused at first because it had several timelines. It was describing this person at 3 p.m. and 10 p.m. And I was really confused because I thought, firstly, how could they have survived this cobra bite? And then I realised that, of course, they were describing the body, and they were going back and looking at the body in the dead house and describing what was happening to the body. So, at 10 o'clock at night, there was still blood trickling from the nose of the body. So I left that for a while, and then I had this sudden realisation that you couldn't have been bitten by a cobra in London in 1852 without getting into the papers. So I got on the Times archive and discovered there were pages and pages about this cobra bite, which of course had attracted the attention of everybody at the time. And it was the most wonderful story about a zookeeper who had gone out drinking, actually was farewelling a friend who was moving to Australia. And they drank gin all night. And then he'd unfortunately gone to work. And his friend who he'd been drinking with went off to get a basket of sparrows, which is what they fed the snakes with. And they were supposed to feed the snakes down these little sort of side bits to the cages. But for some reason, Edward Girling decided he would get the snakes out that day. And he got out one snake and tried to drape it around his friend's neck. And his friend recoiled in horror and was quite relieved when he put it back. And then he heard him say, "And now for the cobra." And when he turned around, he discovered that Edward Girling had lifted the cobra up. It had gone under his waistcoat. It curled right around his back, under his waistcoat, came out through the front of his waistcoat, looked him in the eye, and then struck him on the top of his nose. And somehow he had the presence of mind to put the cobra back in his cage before he went and washed his face under a tap and collapsed. And they got him into a horse-drawn cab and took him across to University College Hospital, where he was resuscitated for over an hour. But obviously he didn't survive. But it is just the most fabulous story. And there's pages and pages in the Times about the inquest, where the jury that were at the inquest actually went to the zoo to visit the snake and look at the scene of the crime. And it says in the Times, the snake hid from the gaze of the jury. So yes, that's chapter 10.
Thanks, Chris. We've got some questions and I might read them out for you. But before doing so, I want to play with, just to let you know, you might know this. This is, to look carefully, this is my University College London scarf. So I thought I'd put that on to celebrate both yourself and Joseph Clover. Jamie Smart asks, we tend to think of perioperative medicine as a new concept, but reading your book, it strikes me that this is not the case, that maybe Joseph Clover was the first true perioperative physician. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. And I'm really glad that that Jamie's smart enough to have realised that on reading the book. I think that was his real strength. And the reason for that, I think, is because he was trained as a surgeon, and he's probably one of the few people who's ever got a fellowship of the College of Surgeons and then switched to anaesthesia as a career. But I think because he was a surgeon and because he had spent several years as a resident medical officer at UCH, a lot of the younger surgeons trained under him and they all trusted him. And so when they went out into private practice, they wanted him to give their anaesthetics, and they trusted his medicine. They trusted his clinical judgment. And there was no better example of that than when Napoleon III was really sick in the last few weeks of his life, and Henry Thompson took Clover with him, and they lived out at Chislehurst for a few days, and Clover examined Napoleon every day prior to giving him an anaesthetic. And on the last day of his life, he actually refused to anaesthetise him because he said he was too sick. And it's so fortunate that he did that, because Napoleon died an hour later, and he would almost have certainly have died under anaesthesia if Clover hadn't realised that he was too sick for the anaesthetic.
Extraordinary. Richard Selix is asking, first of all, well done, Chris, which I think we all share in, of course. For you, what was the most surprising thing that you found in your research?
I think the most surprising thing to me was the level of kindness that people showed to each other and to their patients. I think we're used to reading about surgery in the 1840s and 50s as a brutal, rushed, sort of bloody business. And, you know, that is the sensationalized thing that we see in the media and in a lot of the literature. But in fact, I was quite surprised to see how slowly things were done, how kind people were to their patients, and particularly how kind they were to each other. So as an example, when people had deaths under anaesthesia, I think they were very traumatic, even though they were frequent. And there were a lot of letters in Clover's papers where people have written to him about deaths under anaesthesia, basically saying, as we would today, I hope you're okay. And, you know, you're not to blame for this. People will not think this is your fault. You are an expert, and it would have happened anyway. And all of that really surprised me. I didn't expect to find that. I don't know why, but I didn't.
Yeah, I must say again, having read it myself, I mean, that comes through very beautifully in your writing and in the stories you tell, and really the true stories that you discovered really through all of your research. And I think sometimes that's perhaps been overlooked by others who look at that period of history, perhaps without the sensibility that you show. And I think it just makes it so much more important for the present day, for all of us really. Somebody's asking, which is a great question, what for you at a personal level was the most challenging thing about writing your book?
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging things was getting the courage to actually write it. So I was researching it for years and years and years. And I also really hope that Ruth Richardson is on this Zoom call. Ruth is a wonderful historian who I have met through my research into this book. And she's written several wonderful books herself. And I had some great meetings and meals with Ruth, and she finally said to me, Chris, you've got to stop writing papers and doing research and get on and write this book. And I really struggled for a while with how to do it, because I've written, you know, hundreds of academic papers and they're all for a particular audience, but I really, really wanted this to be for the public. And that's a completely different style of writing. And I found it really, really hard to get started. I think I rewrote the first chapter probably 10 times, and I'd write 2 more chapters and go back and write the first one again. And the first 3 or 4 chapters took me 6 months. But then it's true what they say, that the book starts to write itself, which is sort of what happened in the end. But I think getting started was the biggest challenge for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael Cooper, I presume is in Sydney at the moment, is asking, is there a way of getting an autographed copy of the Chloroformist? Michael, I can tell you that. We need to all get vaccinated and we need a ring of steel around Sydney. But perhaps you might want to answer that one, Chris.
Oh, no, Michael, I've got that sorted for you. I don't know if Melbourne University Press has any way of doing that, but Michael had already asked me for an autographed copy. I have one for him and for Richard Bailey. I'll get them to you as soon as I can get to a post office.
Right. Well, I think you got at least 100 people online at on this webinar that were wanting the same thing. So you better get your autographing hand in action.
I think we should say that, you know, people have been asking me where to buy the book. I mean, obviously it's available through Melbourne University Press. I also think that, you know, this is time to show a bit of love to your local bookshops. They're all really suffering because of COVID, and most of them are available for click and collect. So if you're going to buy the book from a bookshop, make it one that you can support, and you can bring, for people who work with me, you can bring it in and I'll sign it. I think we're going to have a bit of a session, a lunchtime session in a couple of weeks at work. So, but I'm always there. I can always sign books at the Alfred.
Well, we can usually hear you somewhere in the department. So.
Even when I'm not there, Paul.
Yeah. Even when you're at home, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess at the next college scientific meeting, which I'm sure will be face-to-face for everybody, you might have to sort of sit down and have queues of people. Now, Michael Axton's, the lovely Michael Axton's is
Oh, my goodness, Michael, hi.
Congratulations for him as well. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of writing? For you, the discipline required to do that in and amongst all the other responsibilities you have. How do you squeeze it into your life? And have you had writer's block?
I very much write in my head a lot, and I'm also fortunate that I also wake up early in the morning. So I'm very good at writing. It's sort of 5:30 in the morning when the inspiration takes me. And I will often think for a long time before I start and write. I'll often put down ideas on a piece of paper and then go and garden or cook or do of other things and sometimes sleep on it. And then usually the actual writing process is not that difficult, but I do a lot of percolating and I'm obsessive. I'm obsessive about my references. So I use their note. And when I make my notes, I put all the references in as I go so that I don't get lost. So I don't know if that answers your question, Michael, but there's a lot of stuff percolating in my head at any one particular time.
And Joel Simons asked, if Clover were alive today, what is the most important piece of advice he would give to the medical profession?
Well, I think it says it all at the end of the book, that he really believed we should speak gently to patients, that we should acknowledge that they're frightened, that they're anxious, and that they need to know that we're there to care for them. And I think that is the message that all of us would like to get across to our patients, and something that he really embodied, that kindness to patients.
Wonderful, wonderful. David Wilkinson, lovely to hear from him. Hello, David. Why do you think Clover never wrote a book himself?
Well, I do think he wanted to. Clover died when he was 57. He was very sick for the last year of his life. And in his private papers, I found a thing that says sketch of anaesthetic book and a bit of a list of topics that he wanted to cover. And I honestly believe if he'd remained healthy, he would have written a book. But unfortunately, the last year of his life, he was very unwell. In that last year, he managed to write quite a lengthy excerpt for Richard Quain for the Quain Dictionary. And I think that would have been the foundations of a book. But sadly, he was unwell for much of his life. And the last year of his life, he was very unwell. So I think just time, he was out of time.
Yeah, very tragic of itself. Who was the first female anaesthetist and how well was her presence accepted by the medical community of the time?
Well, I think in terms of specialists, there weren't any other many other specialists like Clover at the time, but certainly Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who was the first woman to qualify in medicine in England, she gave anaesthetics, and other women around her all operated and gave anaesthetics for each other. And certainly Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, I would like to know more about her relationship with Clover. I know they knew each other. I can place her in his house on a number of occasions. And I would love to think that he taught her to give anaesthetics, but I can't prove it. I know that all of Clover's friends were very supportive of her as a female doctor, but I've got no primary evidence about how he feels about female doctors, other than that she was present at meetings in his house.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. I think my recollection of reading or your writing of her in the book, The Chloroformist, I think you do make really nice points about the fact that there's very clear evidence of quite strong support for her in medicine, because I know that many hospitals, I think, and maybe even the universities, closed down admissions for women for quite a period of time, or certainly the societies. I think the British Medical Society, was it, Chris? For many
Oh,
years.
yeah, it's British Medical Association. She joined it, and then that was a loophole that she joined it through, and then they shut it down for another 20 years. She really met a lot of opposition, but among Clover's immediate friends, she had a lot of supporters, and I can only presume that he was a supporter, but I can't prove it.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on this yourself in the conversation so far, but Nikki Emile is asking, how has your research for this book impacted your thinking about your work as an anaesthetist in 2021?
Thanks, Nikki. Good to know that you're there too. I think the whole perioperative medical side of it has really been brought home to me by this work. You know, I'm very involved, obviously, in perioperative medicine and help run our Masters of Perioperative Medicine. And we do see it as a bit of a new field in medicine. But I think now I'm going to look at the historiography of perioperative medicine differently. I think probably we've always done it. It's just at various periods of time we've been less visible in the area. But I think probably if we go back and re-examine the records, we'll find that anaesthetists have had big roles to play. And, you know, they certainly did in the days of the development of intensive care, but it's waxed and waned a bit, I think, our involvement in perioperative medicine. So I think that's the thing I've thought about the most while I've been writing this book.
Very interesting. I think, as you say, I mean, if we're taught in certain paradigms, we look for confirmation of those and don't think that in fact it could be a lot broader than perhaps it's been portrayed in the past. That's really interesting. Now I'm going to link the next two questions together because they're very related. Vanessa Beavis is wanting you to keep working, asks what's your next book about, but I'll jump straight to Joy Humphreys, who might be closer to the mark, and is asking, is Elizabeth Garrett Anderson your next project book, Chris?
Well, I have thought about that. I must say Elizabeth Garrett Anderson has had quite a lot written about her. What I have been contemplating and is writing more about women's health. And one of the people who I'm really interested in as a result of the research I've been doing is Spencer Wells. As Spencer Wells was an ovariotomist and also a very good friend of Clover's. They worked closely together. Spencer Wells also incidentally gave the first anaesthetic on Malta, just randomly. But Spencer Wells covers a lot of the same period of history, but different areas. So he was involved in the Navy. He was involved in a lot of vaccination programs, a lot of quarantining for various infectious diseases, which is all very topical. But he really pioneered he wasn't the first ovariotomist, but he was the most thorough. And I think ovariotomy after that became a problematic operation in that while anaesthesia enabled good surgery, it also enabled bad surgery. And a lot of ovariotomies were done for the wrong reasons. And so women's health, while it benefited a lot from anaesthesia, there were some negative things that happened as a result of anaesthesia. And Elizabeth Garrett Anderson is tied up quite closely with Spencer Wells. He worked at the Samaritan Hospital for Women and operated also at her hospital. So I'm still not sure whether my next book, if I write one, is going to be about one person, but I think it will centre around women's health.
Very interesting. Well, I think you get a lot of sales for that one too, I think. The question I think is really particularly interesting. I'll read it out for you. It's anonymous, but it is excellent. So again, a big thank you for this launch and can't wait to read the book, which I fully, make sure everybody buys it, by the way. There's on the chat line at the front, it's got a link there for that. Anyway, they ask, I make the point, I feel the general public is often fascinated with the intricate workings of the medical profession. However, recently with the pandemic and shows like Dr. Death, which is very recent, there have been some mistrust brewing towards the medical profession. What messages are important to you that the general public take away regarding medicine and anesthesiology as a profession from this book?
Okay, so I think that the important message that I wanted to get across in this book was that anaesthetists and surgeons, nursing staff and other operating theatre personnel, technicians and industry reps are all working very closely together, that in the modern operating theatre, we don't have the same egocentric sort of world that we see in the 1840s. We really see a team approach to medicine where we all work collaboratively, preoperatively, intraoperatively and postoperatively to provide the best patient-centred care. And I think patient-centred care is becoming a buzzword in medicine, but it's something that should never have left, and that the patient should be intimately involved in decision-making about their preoperative preparation, about what operation they have and about how they want to recover after the operation. And so while there is negative press around doctors, I think that people should be reassured that in the major teaching hospitals and most of the private hospitals around the country, people are working collaboratively together to provide good, balanced patient care. And Paul, you might like to comment on that too. I mean, you have a very significant role in the community as a leader.
No, you know, Mum's shy. You know, I just stand in the shadows. So, we're going to finish off with one last question, and we'll hand back to Monica Cronin. And this is from George Bass, who asks, so this is now, take away your doctor hat and back to your historian hat, for which you're also world-class. What gap in the historical record most frustrated you while investigating Clover?
Hi, George. George is in America, and it must be very early in the morning where you are, and it's really nice to have you here. I think the thing that really frustrated me about this was not the anaesthetic history, but the history of the women in his life that I really struggled to uncover. So particularly his wife, Mary Ann Hall, who I think must have been an extraordinary woman, and I'm really frustrated that I haven't managed to uncover more of her history. I've uncovered as much as I can. I've explored every possible outlet, and I'm hopeful that the publication of this book might uncover more about her, because she was an artist. She was trained as an artist. She painted some extraordinarily influential women of the time, including Ellen Terry, who was a famous Shakespearean actress, and Mary Ann, names completely escape me, but another famous explorer. And so there's a lot about her I don't understand. I don't understand how she came to be living independently, how she came to have an artist studio. I don't know how they met. And I don't understand a letter she wrote to a friend of hers when she married Joseph, or when she became engaged, when she said, "I know you won't be happy to hear this news, but I think if you knew the spirit into which we are entering into this union, you would be happy for me." And I don't know what that means, but they seem to have had a very successful marriage, and it seems to have been a very genuine affection between them. But there's a lot I don't understand about that relationship. And some of the other women some of the wives of his friends too, who were significant women who I'm struggling to uncover details about their lives. For instance, Henry Thompson was married to a woman called Kate Loder, who was a well-known pianist and composer in her time, and her music is largely lost, but she supported Henry Thompson through his early years as a junior doctor, and I'd like to know more about her as well. So they were the most frustrating things for me, George.
Fantastic, Chris. And again, I think I mentioned in my brief introduction at the start, some of the qualities of Joseph Clover being inquiry, research, and a quest to improve. And just your answering these few questions, we can see you really have got this thirst to do so much more with all the skills that you've developed over these decades, particularly in association with the Geoffrey Kaye Museum of Anaesthetic History at the college. Now, I'll hand back now to Jan Shorrock, who will be closing off the webinar. Thanks.
Can I just say thank you once again to Paul, Jan and Monica for all they have done to make this book launch happen today. Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure, Chris. Look, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paul. And thank you all for joining us. We hope that tonight you've learned a little or you've learned a lot, that you'll remember not to pick up a cobra after drinking gin, that Napoleon had his very own anaesthetist, and that really sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. We hope we've piqued your interest in Joseph Clover, and that as soon as the lights go down, that you jump online and order your copy of The Chloroformist using the link and code that we've been sharing in the chat. You can always contact the college or through the museum if you actually have any issues. And one more thing before we go, as I mentioned before, wherever you are, raise a glass in celebration and acknowledgement of the impressive and multi-talented doctor, researcher, and storyteller, Associate Professor Chris Ball. Go well and thank you.
Thank you, Jan.